the Enlightenment was about entertaining any idea and judging it on its merits, then I feel like we're receding from that position today to one that's about prejudging ideas and pitting them against one another, almost creating a duel of competing ideologies.
Agile comes out of software development. Software development, software engineering as a discipline in science is continues to be woefully behind other engineering disciplines like mechanical, electrical, and civil. And projects are notoriously late. And the main reason is because we've approached it as a metaphor about manufacturing, when actually a more appropriate metaphor might be one about cultivation or growing something.
Agile came out of that need to reinvigorate our instincts for cooperation after we focused perhaps too much on the virtues of individualism. Scrum is about coming together to assess progress, share state, learn, build knowledge, and of course coordinate subsequent activity. Sprint, on the other hand, is about making directed progress along a course that's already been charted, without stopping to question every blade of grass along the way. Scrum and Sprint are actually classic approaches to course plotting. Newton's method of differences is how all directed path problems are solved, subject to target boundary conditions. Short bursts, continuous reappraisal relative to an intended target. When you're sailing to a new destination, you first decide a course, but you have to tack and correct it continuously to avoid drifting away from it, because there are all kinds of unplanned and unknowable things trying to throw you off. There are a lot of lessons here that go back to Taylor and to Deming. The challenge is to incorporate some of the newer ideas about the creative benefits of harnessing autonomy, while at the same time scaling collective purpose. The pendulum swings between self-discipline or selflessness, which give us our efficient mass production from industrial times, to more selfishness or rich contextualization. This is what gives us customized, bespoke solutions to problems, rather than those mass-produced one color as long as it's black. And individual production needs can now be catered to fairly cheaply thanks to our post-industrial information society. And this was predicted way back in the 1960s by people like Alvin Toffler in his book Future Shock. But we have yet to understand how to do that in humans. So a deeper question emerges, which is, how do we keep the benefits of past circumstances while at the same time transforming to embrace the new? In the new millennium, we're well into the post-industrial age, and it's generating confusion because we've grown used to having those nice things from industrialization without necessarily understanding where they came from. We now take them for granted that we can have them without following those procedures. Promise theory was actually invented to understand the scaling of technological systems, how to get, from a model plane in a wind tunnel to scale up to a real one that actually flies overhead carrying passengers. And there are straightforward principles to get there that we understand from physics. And they apply as much to human interactions as they do to inert materials, if we only care to look. And that was what I was really trying to do. Agents which we simply draw as blobs. They could be people, they could be machines, they could be companies. And so, if it's a company, it might be an agent made of... The method of promise diagrams helps us to expose implicit details in a task so that we can really focus on individual contributions and set aside their distractions. So the idea is to capture the essence of how individuals align their thinking so that they can set aside that individuality in a sense to come together and function as a unit. Generation Z tends to frame progress in terms of winning approval, influence, personal contribution, the stamp of individuality. You know, it's classic Western thinking. But the moon landings didn't happen by having endless discussions about personal freedom, respect, and autonomy. There's a time and a place for those things. The goal is not to fully emancipate ourselves from advice or leadership. Escaping injustice is important, but knowing when to emphasize individuality and when to suppress it is a pretty important trade-off in making collaborative systems work. And Scrum provides a forum for expression, while Sprint sort of keeps it in check, the yin and the yang. An example I like to give is, of course, of an orchestra. We couldn't have an orchestra or any of those great works of symphonic composition without the self-discipline of all the players and their astounding individual acts of voluntary cooperation, where they suspend their autonomy voluntarily, individually, to create something that's bigger than any one of them could accomplish on their own. An orchestra is about the causal alignment of intent. You can improvise jazz in small groups, but you can't play a symphony without a strict discipline. In a darker sense, if you want to put it that way, joint activity is about persuading people to become part of a mechanism. More subtle than something like a printing press for sure, but we can't stray too far from that idea either if we want efficiency and predictability. I live in a country where everyone has to have a say in every single decision, and it quickly leads to paralysis of leadership. That's not the way to scale purpose. It creates a tar pit. Basically got everything without having to meet anything. You just order it and you get it on command. Pushing buttons, they're spoiled. And that means when people finally do meet each other, they become isolated. I was invited to come and work with the Open Leadership Network by Daniel Mezek, who saw, this deep connection between the algebra of cooperation that I was developing in Promise Theory and the aims of Agile. I already knew a bit about it because of DevOps, but I hadn't gotten as far as looking at the patterns of human cooperation in that much detail by then. I started to look at it, and it quickly became apparent that there were some surprisingly simple patterns underpinning the way we interact, which are, largely captured by this eightfold way, this OLN core patterns. But you could see explicitly what might work and what might not work from the individual contributions of agents, people and things within a collaboration. For instance, trying to impose on others is less likely to work than inviting people to promise their help voluntarily. And the reasons aren't some sort of warm, fuzzy moral thing about human rights. They're very much pragmatic reasons about the incompleteness of information that results in imposing, which is something that resonates, from my background in physics, where interactions work that way too, essentially. So in developing promise theory for Agile Story, I was looking for a way to understand cooperation in technology originally, especially in IT, where it's perhaps the most socio-technical area of engineering we have today. It was only later that I saw that the human part of the equation starts to take on the dominant role, especially in the new millennium. Our classic ideas for keeping humans together are pretty much more in decline than in ascension, I would say. Because that narrative of personal approval and emancipation from control is now starting to get in the way of working together. Society seems to be at a kind of a crossroads, figuring out what it is that we want. Making everyone feel valued and fulfilled on their personal journeys is important, but so is objective progress and building the infrastructure that we need to underpin society. So suddenly tools like Scrum and Sprint are ever more important to keeping people from drifting off course. But these are just things that we're told to do. To understand why, it turns out that we need this idea of promises, which is the key that underpins that. The conclusions are pretty stark and came as a bit of a surprise to me. But once you've seen them, you can't unsee them. Promise theory takes a bit of practice, but if you can see through that lens, the rest becomes quite obvious. In my working life, I wish I'd understood these things earlier, because I've probably made every mistake you could make in dealings with others. Having these patterns to follow allows you to see the reason why things go wrong. I think no matter what kind of society we end up with, I don't think we can achieve that moonshot of emotional fulfillment that many are seeking without understanding the basic mechanisms of cooperation that we use to get there. Hunter-gathering isn't how we scale to the next level. We formed society for a reason. Cooperation in specialized groups is the key to that, as we know. At the Open Leadership Network, there's this small core group that's bringing these ideas together from a variety of perspectives. And we're starting to teach the ideas and skills for use in practice. People are both naturally curious and suspicious when they hear about promise theory. So I try to emphasize the engineering aspect based on the long experiences that come out of the Agile space. Scrum involves coming together with intent to solve a problem. It's about making promises together to play a role in a story that's larger than an individual. When we assign or delegate tasks, we build on concepts like authorization to offer mandates and the acceptance of working on each other's behalves. We need permissions to access one another's resources and services. We need to understand the risks of delivering up front or in arrears, service on demand, lean just-in-time delivery, or self-service, in which someone takes a risk of providing something up front that we can help ourselves to. Then there's the bigger question of how individuals get invited into a corporation in the first place. It's not all hiring and firing. People really come together essentially of their own free will. Because if we try to impose, they may be either unable or unwilling to cooperate, and they can easily drift off into the void. And this is how companies fall apart. Most of these things we take for granted. And therein also lies the danger in the modern workplace. We tend to mistake past norms for future guarantees. And maybe we even underestimate the fragility of cooperation in the 21st century. As someone who is basically a science guy, my agenda is to pit research above ideology and figure out practical approaches. Theory's nice, it's a privilege actually, but it'd better agree with the world as we know it. And if we don't want to slide back into a second dark age, then we need to address the reasons for that decline. We need a more questioning approach. One that doesn't try to hit people over the head with authoritative science, but rather takes everyone on a journey of rediscovery, of what it means to work together and what it means to be human. Then it has the power to transform the way we work. That doesn't mean casting us all from the same mold, like commodity parts from the Industrial Revolution times, but it does mean temporarily accepting collective identity and placing it above individuality when the context is right.
They said literally that a free press